Epic fail. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you for that. So, starting with yes, thank you. Thanks for playing, everybody. You're all beautiful audience. Okay, so I'm Jonathan. I'm also Jogo. I'm various other names. And my talk is called Fear, Love and Great Big Ideas, which is a much better title than Fear, Love and Planning, which was all I could think of at the time. I had to send an email to Byron. So, if you're sitting in the front, this is what the people at the back can see. So, oh, wonderful projector. So, my talk is about using design theory to keep players playing. And how many of you are actual designers? Some of you are designers, fantastic. So, you're the ones who are going to hate me after this. Because everyone, when you hear this phrase, design theory, you sort of think, ooh, not entirely convinced about that. Well, I hope it's going to be good, because I'm not going to be talking about this from an academic point of view. I'm a practitioner, I make games, I do this stuff for a job, I suppose. And these are the actual sort of design theory that I use day in, day out, and I think it's very useful, and I hope you might find it useful and interesting. These are the games that I've been making. Kumo Lumo, Luma Deliveries, a new game. Time of the Dead, Overkill, worked on in a little stint I did with Sega. Is Hannah here today? No. Hannah's not here. Hannah didn't like the tutorial to Crazy Taxi City Rush. I know the name of the man who designed that. It was Jonathan Evans. So, yeah, there's also a whole bunch of games that are sort of over this side of my career that I don't really talk about anymore, because that was a totally different games industry. The stuff before this, it's, you know, console stuff, work for hire, PlayStation 2, oh, yeah, but stuff that doesn't really have much relevance anymore because the games industry changes so quickly. So, currently working with Team Lumo Developments, a small sort of indie collective who have worked both within Blitz Game Studios and now externally. And our games, they do okay. You know, we get quite a lot of good coverage from the Apple Store. They like the kind of games we make because we're very, very creative, but we're also quite professional and business-minded as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the creative side of what we do today, and then maybe later on somebody will turn up and tell you about the business side. So what follows is going to be a frank, honest, and occasionally quite graphic discussion of game design. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about other people's games, just to sort of establish the terms and sort of help you understand what the hell I'm talking about. And then I'm going to talk a bit about my own games and the games that we're making, and what we've learned and what we're still learning. And probably this is the most important thing, what we're still learning, because the games industry changes every 5 minutes. It changed 3 times this morning. So you have to be continually learning and changing what you do and how you do it. Because if you're still doing the stuff you did 5 years ago, you're sort of creeping towards the edges of relevance. So, here's a wonderful framing concept. A lot of people will tell you, all we need to do is make a big game. I don't entirely agree with this statement. In fact, I would say it's bullshit, and it's dangerous bullshit, because it allows you to focus just on one tiny portion of the game and one tiny type of player without expanding your design and your ideas to take in all sorts of different people and all sorts of different ways in which people are playing. Because there's a lot more to your game. Cat picture! Cat picture, I'm now officially presenting at IGC, yes. So, there's more to your game than the actual visceral, hands-on, paws-on, I'm playing right now, I'm having a great time. There's a lot more to it than that, because you have to keep the player's attention. The reason you have to do that is because we don't live there. Your players don't live in this beautiful digital isolation where they are feeding in a frenzy on whatever pieces of entertainment you mete out towards them. Players actually live there, which is this enormous fire hose of distractions and opportunities and things to take them away from your game. And sometimes that's another game, sometimes it's Twitter or Pinterest or Facebook or pictures of cats. Everybody's talking about pictures of cats. And sometimes even going outside and speaking to people. Bastards. So yeah, there's always something trying to take your players away from your game. And just making, oh, it's a really good fun game, might be fun for 5 minutes, but it's not going to keep people coming back, which is a shame because you've made 4 or 5 hours of gameplay and they're only playing 10 minutes. And so we don't do a wall of text, they said. So we have to be really good to keep people playing. We have to be really good at absolutely all of this stuff. We could do a talk about any single one of these, and a lot of people who have spoken here today and probably spoken at GDC have actually spoken about all sorts of this stuff. But I'm only going to stick to one topic today, which is game loops. It's a very interesting idea about the activities within your game. A game loop is pretty simple. You probably all know this. People like it when I put a slide to something being shot in the face. I don't understand it. So, yeah, a game loop is very simple. It's observation, activity, and reward. And then normally with the opportunity at the end to restart your loop. And it's sort of pretty classic game design. This is how everything works. See it, do it, think about it afterwards. What have we learned here today? But I would argue that there's actually 3 game loops that are all running simultaneously throughout your game. And the first loop is this second to second. It's the micro loop. It's incredibly reactive. It's based on what you can see. You're playing a colourful shoot 'em up, Stardust HD there, which is amazing, by the way. Typical, yeah, very, very typical of the micro loop. It's see it, shoot it, run away. Then there's a macro loop, which is a much longer phase of time in the player's experience. Sometimes that'll be a level, sometimes it's like, we've got Laura here creeping up very slowly onto a guard, so you're planning ahead, but it's all based on what you can actually see. And then there's the day-to-day, which is the meta game. And that's planning based on unseen potential threats and opportunities. You're projecting yourself forward into time and into the future of the game. And you might not actually know what's coming, but you're planning for various different opportunities. And roughly speaking, these turn up as, I have such great plans. You see, the title of my talk was clever. What shall I do next? And holy crap, move. And if you just remember these as basically this, I should have deleted all that stuff. This is far more interesting, really. So it's holy crap, move. What shall I do next? And I have great plans. So looking more in detail at this, the micro loop, physical reactions, dexterity. A lot of it will be shoot one monster, hop once across an obstacle, pass to a teammate. Very, very simple, compressed pieces of your game. The stuff that you concentrate a lot, very, very heavily on, your jump distances, the speed of movement, stuff that's really, really direct, very physical. A lot of the games that use this heavily, very reaction-based, a lot of dexterity. Your emotional state is going to be quite primal, so it's fear, anger, excitement, enjoyment. Sometimes in this game, in this part of the game, there isn't really an emotion. You just slide in a tile, and you're not thinking, wow, I totally slid that orange tile over there. It's just a little activity, and some of the juicy stuff happens elsewhere. Micro loops are interesting because they always lead to a decision. You shoot one monster, and you think, oh, what shall I do now? Shoot another monster, I suppose. So that's you're in an interesting decision pattern there. Good thing about micro loops is that it's really, really easy to diagnose if you fucked it up, because your players will tell you. They'll shout at you, they'll swear at you on Twitter, they'll put the pad down at rest and stalk off in a huff. Very, very easy to tell if you've made a mess of this type of part of your game. Now, your macro loop is more of a mental challenge. It's where you string together perhaps lots of different parts of your micro loop, and this is where you get a lot of satisfaction from executing a short-term plan. It's not dependent on there being a skill game there at all. If you look at Monument Valley, actually just moving your little character around from one place to another isn't that interesting, but it's the whole idea of solving the puzzle is very, very interesting. And a macro loop typically is completing a level, solving a whole puzzle, wiping out a whole area of enemies. And the most interesting thing, and this is one of the best ideas that I think I'd like you to take away from this today, is that when you're in a macro loop, this sort of 5, 10, 15 minutes of gameplay, you often have a little miniature narrative of control, pressure to power. The player enters an environment and they're totally in control, they know what's going on, they can see everything. Then the game starts, the gameplay happens, and more and more they become under pressure. There's more enemies in there, everything's gone chaotic, they've started sliding tiles, and now there's a time limit coming down. In a puzzle game, you're moving around the puzzle environment and the door isn't opening and you don't know how to do it, so you're suddenly under a bit of pressure, and then suddenly you wipe out the last couple of big enemies, you almost get to the next safety spot, you understand the puzzle and you know how to execute it, and suddenly you're feeling powerful. And it's this wonderful moment. So you're going through this wonderful story in your head of control, pressure to power. And that's lovely. It's delicious to actually get that sense of satisfaction when you've completed a portion of the game and you're feeling really good about yourself. And again, because it's satisfaction within a single game session, it's actually quite easy to diagnose if you've got a problem with it, because again, people say, well, I quite like jumping up and down, but I don't know why I didn't get anything from it. Again, people will tell you, you can easy to discover if this stuff is wrong with your game. Now, the metagame is quite an interesting one. This is the long-term emotional interest. This is where you get your motivation and your feedback. A good metagame will explain itself very, very simply. You have got to do this thing over the next couple of weeks or days. You've got to build a castle, you've got to rescue the princess, you've got to destroy the halo, whatever it is. Sometimes it's narrative-based, as in a lot of those examples. Sometimes it'll just be self-expression. If you're playing Minecraft, normally you're building your own thing. That's your motivation, that's your long-term engagement. This is what you want to be. Difficult thing about the metagame is no one will tell you it's wrong. Because you'd ask people, what do you think about my game? And if you've got your micro loop and your meta loop happy, your players will say, oh, it's good, it's really good. And they won't even know why they've stopped playing. Even if they've been playing for weeks, they might have just drifted away. They may have good memories about your game, but they've only got a third of the way through it, and suddenly something else has caught their attention and they're not playing your game anymore. But they'll tell you that it's really good. And they're telling the truth, but they've still gone. And once your player's gone, it's very hard to get them back. So this is something that's very, very difficult to actually diagnose, and you need extraordinary discipline on some very, very good advice. You need some really, really good best friends to look at your game for a long period of time and to actually help you diagnose if you've got a broken meta experience. So, I haven't got any graphs yet, so let's have some graphs. We're going to look at some of these games in more detail now, because, like I said, all of these loops are happening across your games all of the time, probably whether you want them to or not. Crossy Road? You've all played Crossy Road?
Yeah.
It's quite good.
Yeah.
I quite like it. So Crossy Road's very interesting because it's a classic Twitch game. It's very, very quack. I'm going to stick with that because you can play a duck. It's a very quack response game. So it's very instantaneous. You're just moving very, very quickly. There's not a huge amount of sort of session-based feedback in there. Sometimes you beat your own high score, but the longer you play, the less often you're going to beat your high score. So there's not a great deal of interest. And you've got a bit of a metagame where you try to unlock all the characters, and the different characters you unlock show different graphics. There's some interesting sort of macro loop stuff in Crossy Road, where when you've got these really big obstacles to cross, you're stringing together multiple moves, and then you pause. So you're sort of doing a miniature macro loop there, where right now you're in control, then you're under pressure, and then you relax, and you sort of achieve a very small macro loop in there. The timing and pacing of Crossy Road is excellent. Nothing has been left to chance here about how long these long obstacles are before you get a chance to pause and relax. That's one of the things that's actually very, very effective about that game. It's very cleverly put together. Halo, I did have the graph at the bottom, but then I realised that no one apart from Byron will be able to see it, so I put the graphic in front of them. Halo is just, I'm a massive Halo fan. Microloop shooting one monster, it's good. It's good, but it's not where the magic lies. The magic is really in the macro loop, where you come into an area, you look around, and then all these characters come out and attack you, and the skill and the decisions you take in securing an entire area in Halo, which is always broken up into these discrete battle arenas. Lots and lots of fun, because when I'm looking at this screenshot, I can see exactly how this next whole battle is going to play out, because that little guy over there, he's going first. There's another guy at the back. Then you're going to chip away at these little guys, and then you're going to concentrate on the elite. And it's this wonderful little story that you can see as soon as you come in to a battle in Halo. You can just decode your next couple of minutes. Metagame, it's narrative really. You're not playing the game, because there's no upgrade path. You cold start with all your equipment, so you're not really making long-term decisions, but the interest lies in the story, which, if you've done your homework, is really good. If you just play the games, you probably spend most of the time baffled with who these people are and what they're up to. Pokemon, sending one fight move out, it's not that great. It's quite nice, but eventually you think, yeah, okay. Winning a battle, really interesting, that's good. Let's face it, the metagame of Pokemon is where all the juice lies. And it's the most wonderful metagame because it's summed up in just 4 words. Gotta catch 'em all. There is your complete game in a nutshell, 4 words. And that's the wonderful thing about it. The metagame doesn't need to be this grand, complicated scheme. It just needs to be a simple, beautiful motivation saying, here's what you have to do, and here's where you are doing it. Pokemon simply says, gotta catch 'em all. Every single player understands that from 1 second. And also you've got the Pokédex, which shows you exactly how you're doing with your catching the ball. It's just perfection. Rogue Legacy, this is the last of these graphs, by the way. It's just got all stuff going on all over the place. Really, really fascinating little platform game. The coming back and replaying as you're and then your long-term experience as you try to unlock the castle. Rogue Legacy makes you walk past the final room of the game every time you play it. And it shows you how many bosses of the 4 bosses you have defeated, and it makes you do that every single time you play. So you always know what your motivation is and how far you've done. It's an insanely clever piece of game design, and I highly recommend it. Which brings us to my games. Yes, this is Kumo Luma, which is a nice little game where you played a brain cloud and you smiled a lot. Kumo Luma had a very interesting path through through the game loops. From the very first sort of prototype we made of the game, it was really entertaining to play. It was very sweet, it was lovely. You rained on trees and they grew, and the word amazing appeared. So it was just wonderful and friendly and happy, and it felt great to play. The problem was that, as you all know, that if you're a cloud and you run out of water, you die. So most of the games ended with a player raining, which we asked you to do, and then sort of this happened. And that was just a complete downer. Everyone was enjoying playing the game, so we knew the game was good. But then our macro loop was completely broken because it always ended with sort of suicide. Which is fine if you're writing a poem when you're 15, but it doesn't really make for a fun game to play when you're on the bus. It's not that good. So we rectified that. We sort of created a challenge-based system where you had to rain on 6 volcanoes or grow X number of forests, and so we created a nice little narrative loop that ran through each level. And again, we actually took you through the control, the pressure, and the power phases, where you start off and everything's fine, and then you have to start working through the challenges, and more enemies come into the game, and you start running out of water, so you have to top up your water, and so you're under pressure, and then you complete, or you get either when you've completed the last objective, or you're close to the final objective, and then you know you've got it in the hand, and you feel powerful. And we actually took an incredibly literal way of representing this. Lumo's smiles is incredibly expressive. And maybe that's one of the reasons that people felt bonded so strongly with the game, with the character, because you're actually going through this shit the same as he is, you know? You start smiling and then you kind of do this sort of weird face, and then you're happy at the end. So it's the emotions writ large. It's a very literal way of doing it. As far as the metagame goes, I don't think Kuma Lumo had a brilliant one. It's something that we would probably, as all game designers, I'd do that differently. And I probably would, because we just had this standard level pathway with, you could 3-star each level, and it would go on to the 36 levels, and that was the end of the game. And it was okay. It did explain what you needed to do, and it did give you clear feedback as to what you had done. It perhaps wasn't the most exciting way of doing it, or, you know, a linear level progression. It does work, but a lot of level-based games don't get finished, because people get a wonderful experience from half a dozen levels, particularly in a small mobile game like this. You know, you've got 12 levels to play. Even though there's more interesting stuff and more fun stuff later on, they've got quite a lot of great content already. So the level-based procedure is, yeah, I would approach with caution, really. Which brings us to Lumo Deliveries Incorporated, which we released last year, and we almost buggered up our metagame again. See what I mean about still learning? We're still learning. Lumo Deliveries is the little resource management game where you live in the wonderful and exciting world of international logistics. Everybody wants to be an international logistics manager, as we proved. It's an odd one, really, because the micro loop is sort of not there, or is split in two. You have one section where you start off your jobs, and you just make your little decisions, and then you have this other section where the jobs you started 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, complete, and you deliver the parcels. So you almost get no feedback when you start the game, and then all the feedback is bound in this final screen. And it's quite an interesting one, because nobody really minded the fact that they were getting resolution from a decision that they'd taken in a previous session. People actually just enjoyed it. So you can play a little bit fast and loose with your micro and macro loops, as long as there's something interesting. But the problem we had was everybody who was really enjoying the game and really getting a lot of the experience of the game kept on saying this. Wrong slide. Right. Whoa! Okay. I'll come back to the other slide in a minute. That's a little bit of excitement for you. Other slide. Okay, so we're talking about the Lumo Deliveries. We're talking about the metagame now, and we thought that this was the good stuff, because Lumo Deliveries, if it has anything else, it's got style. And we thought that, look, we've got all these characters to buy, we've got all these vehicles to unlock. It's all people are going to enjoy this. People are going to want to progress through the game, to find all these things, to unlock them, and to use them. And that's going to be enough, because the activity is just lovely. People are reporting really, really strong enjoyment of the core activities. This is going to be enough. And now there's the slide. People kept on saying, why? And we said, well, look at all this. It's great, that's why. And then they look at us and go, why? And we thought, oh, you bastards. But they were right. They were right, because there wasn't a long-term engaging plan for the game. There wasn't this whole emotional contact, this, why am I doing it? How far am I? What's my goal? What am I going to get out of it? We didn't have that in the game. So we added one. We added a map. People love maps, by the way. They really love maps. Metaphorical or not, this global view of where you are and how well you've done it's just perfect. It works really well. So we gave you this map, and we said we have to dominate the international logistics industry in all of these territories. And boom, everybody suddenly understood it. They knew what they had to do, They knew why they were doing it. They had a goal, they had an aim, and they knew that this piece of feedback worked very, very well. And we knew we'd done a good job when people actually started complaining. Because people don't complain about stuff they don't care about. They only complain about the stuff they really care about that isn't actually delivering quite enough. So people started complaining about our game. They couldn't get to Mongolia. Mexico never came up. Portugal never came up. And people got stuck on 66.67% for weeks. So we knew we had problems. And we're still sort of rectifying those problems. We have plans for it. But those complaints, they were all right, they were all correct, they were all justified. Because this was a very, very natural response from our players. In fact, a lot of them were some of them were my friends. I went for breakfast with some friends last Sunday morning. They said, "Your game's pissing us off." I said, "Oh, hello, Joe, Liz, what's wrong?" "We can't get Portugal." "I know, I'm going to fix it. I know how to fix it. I'll make it fairer, it'll be more balanced instead of just a bit of hot luck." Because we didn't know what we didn't know when we made this. We thought, "It'll be brilliant, people just keep on playing until they find Mongolia, it'll be amazing." And then people say, "No, I'm aiming for that now. I want you to come up more than 1 in 300 times." So, we now know what we don't know, what we didn't know previously. We might even add, like, space. We may do this, we don't know. Everybody likes space. So, do you want us to add space to the game, by the way?
Yeah.
Everybody's saying yes. Right, that'll be £120,000, please, if you could just put some money in the tip jar out the front. So, okay, if you like space, yeah, but we kind of know what we need to do with that game, give people a better purpose. Which brings us to another game. Now, I'm not saying we're making a game about a sleeping cat, but we are. We are making a game about a sleeping cat. And this is now made with stuff that we have learned from Kumo Lumo and Lumo Deliveries, and just from the changes in the game scene of the past 25 minutes. So, first thing we did with our new game is we prototyped the actual game to see if it was fun. That turned out to be went pretty well, and if I get drunk later I might even show you. It's on my phone. Second thing we did was prototype the metagame, because we knew we'd always struggled with this and we needed to get it better. So we actually started working and heavily designing the meta experience, which probably doesn't make a lot of sense from these 4 images, but trust me, it's great. The interesting thing we did with this prototype, it was a completely separate prototype from the gamey game, I suppose, where we just set up these little screens, skipped the gameplay completely, but made you go through the decision, risk and reward loop of the broader game, where you have to earn stars to progress with the metagame. So we'd make you gamble the stars by feeding your cat cheese. Yeah, with me so far? Right, good. And the more cheese that you ate, the more cheese you fed your cat, the more difficult it got. The more worms and bits of mice you fed your cat, the easier it got. And the more stuff you fed your cat, the more stars you gambled and could win or lose during the gameplay, which we skipped and just did a D100 die roll to discover whether or not you'd won or not. And this kind of wiped out a couple of days of development because we sat there playing the game. And that was that's a great sign. If we were captivated by the metagame without even what traditionally would be seen as the fun bit, then we had something that was very interesting. That's an idea that I would very much recommend to you if you've got a slightly more arcadey game wrapped in a metagame, is prototype the metagame and play it without the game being there. See how the ideas and the tactics and the planning progresses as you're playing the game. And that might be a screenshot of the game, it might not be. Come see me later. So, small words to conclude. These 3 game loops are always happening. They always apply to your game, whether you want them to or not. The micro loop, the macro loop, and the meta loop. You can call these whatever you want. You can call it immediate, tactical, and strategic, however you want to call it. These all apply to your game because they apply to the players. You know, some people talk about your core loop. I don't really like the term core loop because it's totally defined by the designer. Whereas if you talk about these sort of attention-based loops, you're now talking about the player, which is a much better way to analyze your game and to understand your game and to find out what may be wrong with the game, putting the player as the core of the experience. So all of these apply to your game. Some of them are very easy to define, to discover if you've done it wrong. The last one, the metagame, is sometimes very, very difficult, and it takes a lot of friendly advice and disciplined design to actually zoom out of your game and ask yourself, what's wrong? The emotional story, control, pressure, power, is a brilliant way to actually make your game have a lot more feel and juice to it as you're shifting between these emotional states. Even in, again, you just look at something like Crossy Road. As you go from control, pressure to power, you're shifting through these interesting emotional states, and keeping the player shifting between these emotional states is one of the keys. It's not the only way, it's one of the keys to making a really, really great game. And answer the question why. Look at your game and say, why? Really, why? And remember that the answer to that does not necessarily need to be some grand, life-changing idea. It's just a very simple, compulsive idea that you can implant in the player's head, dominate the world of international logistics. I think that's pretty good. Some people say they've got to catch 'em all would be better. But one idea that you can encapsulate in the player's head, very powerful. Because just making a great game isn't enough. It's enough if you want to do it, get the player for 5 minutes. But as a thing, its time has passed. You have to be clever and smarter, you have to understand your players and how your players are being distracted and what other things the players want to do that day. Because I don't really believe there's as many reverential gamers left as perhaps there were. You know, when we grew up, we only had 6 games to play, and they took 10 minutes to load. Of course we're going to play for ages. Now people have got 30 games in their pocket to choose from when they go to the toilet. So what your job now is to get people to come back to your game with a compelling reason. And maybe give them something to love. Give them something they can enjoy and feel something for in the long term. Boom. I think I've got some time for questions, so if anybody has some questions, first.
As a self-confessed Halo fiend, perhaps you can describe what you think of the metagame of Bungie's new version of Halo. The name escapes me.
Destiny.
Destiny, yeah.
I haven't played Destiny yet. So, from what I understand, people are getting very captivated by it, even though they're a little bit dissatisfied with it.
Yeah, people say that they hate it, but they can't stop playing it.
Yeah. So, obviously they're doing something right. I think a better way to do that would be have something that people really enjoy engaging with, and
it sounds like one of their loops is broken in your ontology, but the meta is very good.
yeah, perhaps. Perhaps there isn't a strong enough why. What they've done is systemized the metagame by making small numbers get bigger, but they've not provided the subsequent emotional feedback of, now your numbers are bigger, here is improved experiences. It just means you stand there for 20 minutes shooting a bullet sponge instead of 30 minutes shooting the same bullet sponge. I've seen those videos. So I think there's something out of whack there. Interestingly, with Lumo Deliveries, which is very much like Destiny in many ways, people who are stuck on get into Mongolia and Mexico and North Korea because they don't turn up often enough. They're still playing the game because they really, really want to complete it. The problem, I mean, that's sort of good from a slightly cynical point of view because they're still engaging with the game. But it saddens me that it's not good quality engagement. We're not making people thrilled. We're making people frustrated as they try and get that. And so we want to fix that and then give a better long-term goal beyond just that basic domination. So there.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Roger.
Okay. Anybody else? I think in the black hat, your hand was up first.
If you were to replace the map in the cloud game, what would you have changed it for?
Okay, so in the cloud game, what would I replace the sort of the level view?
Yeah.
I think I'd probably have turned it more into slightly more of an infinite runner type roguelike experience where you'd always go in and just play the game. It would just be play. And then perhaps have sort of a screen in between your play loops where you saw a world that you were developing and growing and expanding, because I think that would be more narratively and emotionally related to the actual game itself, because the whole game was actually about protecting and nurturing and growing life and looking after this planet. So having something that just literalised that, I think I'd probably feel more comfortable with that. I think there'd be a stronger emotional connection with something like that rather than level 7 that's got the shitty clouds in it. Well done. Rupert.
Thank you. Your description of Crossy Road I found interesting. One of the things I found most interesting about that was I probably would have expected the word meta to mean about the game, and I think Crossy Road did meta through their Twitter and social kind of thing. Is that another level, or meta or whatever for in your ontology, or is that more, is that something you think about when you're trying to do a game design, or
Okay.
thoughts on that sort of social?
Okay, so a community engagement level to the game, which exists sort of outside the game itself. I think that's definitely an interesting thing. I think with the terminology I've used when I say metagame, one of the interesting things about it is that a lot of that mental operation happens when you're not even playing the game. When you're walking to town or sitting at work and you're thinking, oh, I'm gonna buy that hat. I'm gonna buy that hat, I'm gonna be the man with the red hat in that game. That's what I want to be. And you're thinking about this stuff when you're even playing. And this sort of community outreach stuff, that has that same reflection as well, where it's bringing people back into the mental and emotional space of the game when they're not actually playing. So it's a different level. It is sort of perhaps a sphere expanded from that, but it is a similar, there are interesting things going on there where it brings people back to think about the game and to perhaps give them ideas of how to play that they're not happening whilst they're sitting there with a pad in their hand or the touchscreen device. Your iPhone. Yellow t-shirt.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I play a lot of strategy games and I kind of find I get to the middle of the game and then I get bored, and it's much more exciting to go back and start the game from fresh. I mean, is that a case of like the macro loop being broken, as it were, because I'm never getting out of it?
It is possible, yeah, because again, this is why I sort of counsel approach with caution to doing a game that's just, I've made a great game, now here's 25 different varieties of it. Oh, by the way, the second 15 are going to be really hard. You require a specific, that plays well to some types of gamers who are sort of more challenge oriented and want the completion and have that sort of challenge completist psychology. But if you've got players who actually are more in the moment enjoyers of the game, perhaps like yourself in these strategy games where you're having a lot of fun and then you don't feel the need to push it further into more complexity and more difficulty, then that's where a level structure becomes more damaging. And perhaps there's just too many levels. A lot of games, they just bust out too many levels, and it's a wonderful piece of pride for the 9 people on who will have that on their Steam achievements list.
I guess I was thinking more of something like Civilization, where like I get to the Middle Ages or whatever, and you know,
the loops in those sorts of
yeah.
games, they change, they're dynamic. So as the further into a play session you get, the interesting micro and macro that you might have been dealing with early on that's engaging you change into these longer periodical strategic loops where it takes longer to achieve things, and maybe you're making slightly different decisions with a different input matrix of what you're making those decisions based on. So that the game itself is changing for you in that mid to late game, and it's not engaging you. So that the loop has changed, and it's not the loop that you were engaging with initially and enjoying, I think.
that
Input
kind of
matrix, I like it.
okay,
No, but I think that's potentially very true. And because a lot of the things that you get when you've got a long-term game, when I was in university, I used to play SimCity 2000, which was always the best one. Maxis, rest in peace.
Oh god.
Oh, I'm sorry, but you didn't bum you out then. But, so I used to play. Real good. There you go. Ding. So I used to play SimCity, and all the start of setting up your city was always this wonderful challenge as you try to drag yourself over the hill into a little bit of profitability instead of constantly shipping money every sort of game week. And it was wonderful, it was such a challenge. And then you got over that hill and suddenly you're making profit, and then you just build in sewers. And it was less interesting beyond that initial challenge. And I don't know if some of these strategy games have that issue where the initial moments of when you're under pressure so much and it could all end very, very quickly. The immediacy of defeat is very, very prominent, but when you've got a large civilization, then you're either going to survive and just bimble on until some sort of mediocre ending, or you're going to end up in a slow death spiral.
I think there's a sort of, when you're right at the start of the game, every single decision you make has a much bigger impact. It almost has a butterfly effect. So it's like, okay, if I decide to build, this is my first building or research, that is my first technology, that's a much more important decision in terms of like the long term, how quickly you're then able to expand and take advantage of the area around you and so on.
Exactly. So you've got these high stakes with a fairly close bit of resolution. I've built up in the mountains where there's no resources nearby. There's gold in the hills, but I've got no food. Everyone's dead.
Yeah.
Boo-hoo. At least I'm rich. So yeah, so some of the things I was kind of everybody go.
Thank you. For a lot of the talk of first player or single player stuff, could you give us some thoughts or comments upon how this expands to multiplayer? So, I've got a local multiplayer. Other than let's get together Friday night to play my game, that's about the only meta easy big loop I've got. Other than now I think maybe I need to introduce like extra levels or maps or whatever. Any thoughts on multiplayer?
Okay, so multiplayer in a meta game, that's an interesting one. In some of the big multiplayer games, particularly the sort of your Call of Duties and stuff like that, introduced the whole leveling up mechanic, and they did it again with Halo 4, where you'd sort of unlock new equipment, and it became a little bit of an insane stack chase, where certain people who may or may not be 15 have got all the best kit, and you're standing there with a pea shooter whilst they sprint off and use their jetpacks, and I think it's actually 343 who said we're not going to do that again, because I think they found that their meta experience turned into more of a stat chase than an engagement chase. It's a difficult one because obviously the stat chase and the perks didn't do badly for Call of Duty, but Call of Duty is such an immaculately implemented multiplayer game that it's hard to know how it would play. Would it still have the level of engagement if it didn't have this sort of systemized, stat-driven experience?
Have you ever played EVE Online? Because a lot of that is about metagame, to the point where people will, DDoS like the other alliance's servers, in the middle of a fight.
I went to Nord Game Convention a couple of years ago, where some of the guys from CCP gave this great story where there was these two factions fighting it out, and then the community managers found out who was funding each faction, and there was a big group of Chinese players funding one side, and a massive group of Americans funding the other side. And I thought, oh my God, I hope none of these people work for the government. Oh, I hope they do when they get it out now. So that's my EVE Online story, because I am terrified of playing EVE Online, because I know that I'd be bimbling along in the space equivalent of a Nissan Micra whilst a warship comes up with its alien death missile and does a manual insertion of rocket. So unfortunately I haven't played EVE Online, but with the friends who have played it, I know that they get obsessed, and this whole idea of creating getting a massive dreadnought and a bigger fleet and loads of little minions to do your evil bidding, which is always a good idea. So, Alex, one more?
Last one, sure.
Last one.
Going to your Sleepy Cat mystery game, you focus mainly basically on the meta game for the initial design?
Not as such, actually. With that game, we had the sort of the more game loop, the actual, the more playable visceral game sort of designed, and then we had it lined up as Lumo Deliveries was launching. So that's when we realised that, wow, these metagames have to be, that this long-term experience has to be really, really tight and really engaging. And then we took another look back at Lumo Deliveries and at the cat game to reassess what gaps we now had. And actually to this, still now, we are working very, very heavily on sort of the long-term experience of the new game, just trying to get not only the right systems, but also the correct fiction, which is something that the correct fiction is your one line. That's the thing you explain to the players. So you've got to keep the cat asleep for 100 years, or whatever it is that the fiction that we actually go, that will be the emotional connection. So that's where we're at the moment with that game, because we were still fairly close in, but...
Would you say, or would you recommend that as being the approach to take specifically for your development, your game, or would you say that's more a general thing, you can go starting there and then go down to the...
Okay, so there is another game that we are looking at beyond Lumo's Cat, where we're a very busy team. Yeah, we sort of pretty fast in around. And then to get the next game that we've sort of got spec'd out, that started with, here's who you are and what you have to do forever. And then, so that has been designed from the metagame down. And then everything has been linked into this sort of long-term experience, which at this point, where it's not in active development, has made it much easier for us to explain and for us to define what the next decisions and what the systems need to be in order to achieve what we wanted. So I think from now on, I would look at the metagame first. I might have some thematics or some mechanics, but I wouldn't go too deeply into that. I would actually say, so how is this going to work? And therefore, what does the fiction need to be that's actually going to drive the actual system design? Because when you're talking about the fiction, you are talking about the creative heart of the game. So you're in the right space for creating a new product. You're not starting to say, oh, what's my bar chart going to look like, which is a crap way to design a game. But starting with an emotive fiction is actually a much stronger place to begin your design. Mitch?
Oh, yes.
Brilliant.